Privet, Katila, Wandering Ruski Desu, and today I am doing something that might seem familiar to a lot of you, or maybe not a lot of you, but I'm doing the 8 values test. And for all of you aware, if you look back in my video history a little bit, I took an 8 value, so you might be wondering to yourself, why in the world are you taking the 8 values again? Good question, my dear friend. Because it's been a year, and I think maybe this could become a sort of like a ritual, but every year I want to take the 8 values to see if I've changed. Now, last time I took this, it was my first video after like 2 years after like I remade my channel to a political channel. After like a 2-year hiatus, this was my first video, like a 8 values test. And it's been a year, a little over a year actually, and I wanted to show where I am, what my thoughts are, and basically explain. And you'll I mean, I've not changed on everything. In fact, I probably haven't changed on a lot, but I've changed on some. Actually, a decent amount, I would say. So a lot of the arguments I make when I choose an answer for this is going to sound familiar from my first video. Because sometimes, you know, I haven't been convinced to change my mind on certain issues, but I've changed my mind on some. So let's see where I am. I haven't taken this test in a while. Last time might have been the last time I took this. I might have taken this a few months ago too, maybe. But we'll see how I figure out. Let's see if I change my mind. Got it. All right, and I'm gonna make this short and sweet. Well, maybe not short and sweet. I actually kind of want to. The reason for these is to flesh out what I am and who I am and all that. And I also think the 8 values is like like one of the best tests out there. I think it's the right mix. First of all, it's not. I think it's very neutral. I think the questions it's comprehensive, and it's not like, you know, like biased. It's not sloppy. It's not shitty like the political compass. I think the 8 values is more than just like very specific. It's like, you know, it's not like policy specific. It's more like kind of broad, so you could get your political ideology down. Less so of like your political thoughts on certain issues. I mean, they do have that, but it's more like broad, but it's not too broad. It's not like, what do you think about hierarchy? You know, it's like, you know, kind of a mixture, and I think that's pretty good. I think this is one of the best tests out there. There's something that's even huge, or a more bigger version of 8 values called the 9-axis test, which is like 216 questions. I'm not going to subject you to that. I've taken that a few times before. I feel like it became so big that they became, like, questions started becoming, like, repetitive. So I'm going to do this. I think this is one of the best political tests. So let's start. Okay, so the first question is, oppression by corporations is more of a concern than oppression by governments. So my mind on that is that oppression means something, at least to me. I think oppression, that means, like, words mean things. Like, they can't be, you know, like, you can't say everything is an oppression. Now, if you look at, you know, corporations, especially, like, Silicon Valley types, which, you know, like, you could argue, like, you know, they're paying an undue influence on, you know, bigger than they are supposed to be on our public life, but they're not oppressive. Like, Twitter banning me or something, they haven't banned me, but if they've banned me, that might be an overreach in my opinion. But that is not. I'm not going to argue that I'm oppressed by that, you know. So I can't argue that corporations do have an undue influence on our public life. But when it comes to who could actually still do the oppression, who am I still worried about? Who could do an oppressive act? I would argue the government. And it's not like you know, when the government does have you know, especially in Europe, where they, you know, put you in jail for speaking certain taboo topics, and, you know, they're the ones with all the power too. So, like, they could, like, in England, for example, they could be like, they could use their power for evil, like arresting you because you didn't have a license to speak. I mean, I'm being over exaggerated, but bear with me. Or they could be apathetic, and you're like, you know what, we're gonna allow the grooming gangs to run loose because we don't want to be called racist. Those are things that the government are actively either pushing or being apathetic about, and because of their power, they're able to, you know, based on who is in government, they're able to influence society and actually do some oppressive things way more. Yeah. So for all this, in terms of, for me, the government is right now who could hold the most oppressive power. Now, that doesn't mean corporations can't be oppressive. They can be. So I'm going to put slightly disagree, just slightly though. Also, I'm going to try to give try to be more than just neutral. There is some I think there are questions I'm gonna try to give my opinion on every single issue, but there's sometimes I'm just neutral on certain things. It is necessary for the government to intervene in the economy to protect consumers. Now, that is something I strongly agree with. My opinion in terms of the government, this is the first few questions about the economy. In my opinion, the government is, you could say, how would you say I see a role for the state in economic affairs, and I'm not a free market capitalist. I would consider myself a capitalist in the sense that I do believe in the fundamental underpinnings that a capitalist economy by definition is, like private property, competition, things like that. I support that, but I think that the state has a role to make sure the economy works for the people of that nation. And so, now we could argue what exactly is good, which is bad, but I think, in terms of, do I think it is in the state's interest to intervene in the economy to protect, as they say in this question, consumers? Not just consumers, in terms of being sure that what a consumer buys is actually they're not subject to fraud, or that the thing they buy is actually they label it hey, listen, this is the this is what it's supposed to do. This is, you might get addicted by this. This has you have to make sure what they make, what corporations make with their products is not toxic. There is that, but I also, if you want to expand that definition, that question, I actually do believe that the state has a duty to ensure at least a fair environment for not just labor but also the people in it, but also fair to businesses, because I'm not anti-business. I think businesses are good, but everyone should have, under a society, you have to take the whole pie. You can't just take a piece of the pie. You have to take the whole pie. Labor, business, everyone, just everything that's in the economy, the people who are outside the economy, the workers, the management, the unemployed, the people who can't even work at all because they're blind. You have to take everything, and you have to make sure that it runs in a cohesive whole, because you need businesses, and you need the labor, and there needs to be a harmonious thing between them. But, sometimes that is something the state has to intervene in to ensure that, or else a single laborer doesn't have the exact power than a company would. So the state has to come in to prop them up. The free of the market, the free of the people. Well, let's see. So, depends on what you mean by free. Yes, technically, when the government doesn't tell you what to do, you are, in one sense, free. Because you don't have to deal with government, stuff. But is that a good thing? I would argue no. But in the sense of the question that, are you more free? Yes, I'll slightly agree on that. You are sort of more free when there is less, but that does not necessarily mean that's a good thing. Just because you're more free doesn't mean that's necessarily a good thing. In the sense of, you could be, the government could be what, we're going to allow you to do heroin. Are you more free in that case? I would argue, well, actually, no, to be honest. I'm going to put neutral this, actually. I'm kind of between agree and neutral. I did say I didn't want to put neutral, though, didn't I? I'm going to put agree. Well, yeah. It is better to maintain a balanced budget than to ensure welfare for all citizens. No, I think there are, in a welfare state, ideally, you provide, everyone pays taxes, and in turn, we do collective action, that's something that individuals can't do collectively. Things that, and not just that, also to help the downtrodden. I strongly believe in that. I believe, in helping the poor and, the people who are disabled and things like that, and the young and the old. I think that, obviously you can't just run deficits every single year. That's not just because we go into a deficit doesn't mean it's a bad thing, in my opinion. But I do agree. I mean, I'm not against the balanced budget. But I do believe that, if it comes to, being, the thing is, in modern democracies, you can, distribute your funds in certain ways. Some funds are widely misused, right? And some funds are not. And, so yeah, you could, ensure welfare for everyone. But so it's not like I'm at least the way I'm interpreting this question, it's like, okay, well, listen, we don't have enough. We're gonna have to, we might have to go to a deficit to help, pay for infrastructure investments or something like that. I'm fine with deficits, but I would prefer. I mean, I'm not against a balanced budget, but I think in a modern world, I would prefer it where we ensure that, if we want to be competitive as a nation, if we want to be actually moral as a nation, we need to ensure that certain things are provided for our citizens, and that might mean going to a deficit, but I believe that we could do both. And actually, if we manage the funds correctly, if we cut spending in some areas, raise taxes in others, and then use the extra funds and saving funds to the right areas, we can at least cut our deficit and maybe even get a balanced budget. We'll see. Obviously, I'm not a public finance expert. I'm majoring in finance actually, but I don't know every single nook and cranny about everything. So, but we can. It's not an either or, but I would prefer ensuring that we provide our people with certain services rather than like trying to be penny pitchers about it. But I'm not against a balanced budget. Publicly funded research is more beneficial to people than leaving it to the market. That's a good question. So now the question for this is publicly funded research. Now I'm all in favor of research and development. A lot of the technology from the space race, from the internet, from the military, this is all made from government money. And it doesn't. And a lot of the things that happen is not just government too. It's the government working with private enterprise. That's, I think, a really good wholesome relationship in a lot of circumstances, not all the time, but I think that's I think the American way is the government, a honest government working with private industry. The thing is that so this question is, if publicly funded, so the funds are funded by taxpayers, and we figure out some new way of doing things. Would it be beneficial, or if I think I read it wrong. Yeah, so is funding public research better than just leaving research to the market? I don't think it's an either or thing. I don't think, again, like the balanced budget thing, private businesses could do research all they want. That's fine. They could, in fact, that's probably a great thing, because competition, if you get a competitive edge, you get more money, right? But the thing is that there's some public research that just won't be done because it's not profitable, or the cost to do so is just so astronomical that it would take decades to get any rewards out of doing research into that. And then your competitors would just like, oh, you figured out something. Oh, cool. You spend all your money on that. Now we're gonna just incorporate it. So there is a thing for people, and sometimes it's things that because what businesses will look at is funding for what makes them more profitable. And then what you could do with funds that are not necessarily the most profitable research that, maybe it would benefit people greatly, but it's not just something you can make a profit out of. That is where public funding of research comes in. Sometimes it can be both, which is the best of both worlds, but, publicly funded research serves the purpose for the nation and the people. Private research is for people who, they're trying to make sure they could get their businesses more competitive, which is fine. But public research for the people is something that needs to be there, in my opinion. So agree. Tariffs on international trade are important to encourage local production. So this has all types of things innuated to it, in my opinion. I think one thing I've realized is free trade is better than a lot. I think in terms of trading with everyone. In the world economy, it has brought down prices materially, but we have to understand this. You can't just, as we've known with this coronavirus, you can't just offshore your entire industry and expect things to go well. There's national security interests to take into account. There's your competitiveness as a nation you have to take into account. I think things that every single nation does, they have to implement like an industrial strategy. We're going to invest in infrastructure, in research and development, in industry, in technology. And we're going to work with companies to ensure that people who hire and make stuff in America are the ones who get preferential treatment. I don't think we should be protectionist in everything. There's going to be some things that some countries just do better at. And, you know, it's a trade-off. But I don't think free trade is just free trade and that's it. The reason why free trade is so good is because they're able to get stuff from everyone who makes things that your country can't necessarily do. But there's a few caveats in that, in my opinion. I think, first of all, your nation has to be self-sufficient in food, in water, in electricity, in medical supplies, in arms, you know, production. Imagine if like all we outsourced. You know, it could be cheap. We could get planes cheaper if we made them all in China. But I don't think people would argue. I think people would argue that having them here at home is not just national security and for jobs. I mean, it's just needed. So it's a balance. I'm not against free trade, but I would strongly, well, because tariffs, like, we don't have to tariff everything under the sun, but, you know, there's some countries are smart, such as China, where they continuously, you know, use government to prop up their companies and use intellectual sabotage and theft. And we're just like, oh, maybe if we do like free trade, everything will be fine. No, it will not be fine. So free trade is fine, but not. But in terms of how would you say it? There is a bunch of accounts. So I will agree, tariffs, you know, are needed in a lot of circumstances. Not all the time. It's not like I'm against free trade. It's not like it's always bad. But yes, I agree that free trade isn't the end all be all, and the nation has more important matters than to maximize economic efficiency, so I agree. From each according to his ability, each according to his needs. I still, like last time, don't know what the fuck this means. I know it's a big Marxian term. I'm going to disagree. I don't agree that, and at least I've researched a little bit more on this than last time. At least, and I'm not an expert at this by any means, but if my interpretation is correct, that it's like some sort of like people should be, the means should be, you know, the government's like, is like micromanaging everything and then like giving you, this is your job, this is what you need to do, and then you do this. I disagree with that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe a Marxist could help me understand what this means. But I tend to lean towards that the idea of Marxism is crap. Because it is. It would be best if social programs were abolished in favor of private charity. No. Strongly disagree. Obviously, you know, welfare or social programs, they serve a purpose in ensuring that everyone's able to at least at least have a bare standard of living, in the sense that, you know, we take care of each other because we're fellow Americans, or, you know, we are, if you're in Denmark, we're fellow Danes, and we're going to pitch in and be sure that our neighbor who maybe gets cancer, or maybe he has a child to send to school with, we're able to take care of that. Maybe he gets into an accident, maybe he goes blind, who knows. But that's, I support social programs. I support, you know, investments in collective action problems that help the nation. So yeah, social programs should not be abolished. I think that if we had more private charity, you wouldn't need a lot of more government. But I feel like libertarians kind of put, I don't know the saying for it, but they're like, you know, let's just abolish all private charity. Abolish all social programs and charity, and then they're like, well, and then when you ask them, like, well, what about the downtrodden? They're like, well, people will take care of them through charity, and it's just like a cop-out. So yeah, no, strongly disagree. Taxes should be increased on the rich to provide for the poor. So, my opinion, it's not that rich people themselves are a bad thing. I don't care if they're really rich. It's more like, I agree that their money should be taxed more to provide for better services for the poor. So, I don't agree with, like, I don't really care that it's to make it more equal. I don't really care about income inequality in the sense that, oh, some people have more than others. I don't care about that. That's actually natural, actually. And I think that's actually a good thing. But in terms of in a society, rich people should be taxed more than a middle-class person for services that the more poor. Now, the balance is also, like, you know, you can't just provide everything for poor people. Sometimes poor people are just poor because they just don't want to put in the hard work. There is a certain element to that, too. But there are people out there who are also struggling. So you need to have, not only, it's not just economics, you have to have the right, you know, moral system in place. You can't just have if you have I fundamentally believe that it's not just economics. So you have to have a homogeneous, high-trust nation, and you need to also have you know, a culture of hard work and determination, and people who, you know, and honesty. That is how you get, you know, better economic outputs than just if you have a dysfunctional, diverse nation, and who don't trust each other, and, you know, people just are lazy. Then welfare programs aren't going to help much. But I do agree that even in a moral society, I think rich people should pay more. Inheritance is a legitimate form of wealth. I mean, you know, yes, obviously, strongly agree on that. The reason for that is because, you know, let's say after your years of toiling, you work your ass, you get taxed, you know, and then at the end of your life, you have some money you want to give to your children. I have no, you know, if your children get $100,000 from you, and they are worth $100,000. That's why should that matter? Yes, they got money. I got taxed. It got, you know, the person earned it, and they're like, hey, I'm going to give it to you. It's like, oh, is it unfair that someone who makes $50 is, you know, because you got that for your birthday? I mean, you didn't earn that. Well, you got given it, and that $50 someone gave to you, it was taxed. They made it themselves, and they want to give it to you. So, I mean, that's stupid. Yes, inheritance is a legitimate form of wealth. I plan on getting some Papa John's soon. Basic utilities like roads and electricity should be publicly owned. Ooh, good question. So the thing with this is like a double question. It's like, you know, maybe I agree roads should be publicly owned and electricity should be publicly owned, but I don't know what exactly they mean by that. I'm gonna agree, because first of all, like, what do they mean by publicly owned, right? You know, what exactly do they mean by, you know, like, do they mean workers running it? That's kind of dumb. Do they mean the government, like, literally just nationalizing it? Do they mean, like, what do they mean? Is it just taxpayer funded, or, like, what are they talking about here? So we have to look, so I'm just gonna slightly agree, though, because here's the thing. When it comes to roads, and when it comes to, like, big, basic services, I think that, you know, I like, for example, like electricity. In a capitalist system, obviously, the way you would work is that there'd be like 10 or 20 different electric companies, but that can't work. You only can have one electric current coming into your house. It has to be, you know, maybe it could be privately run, maybe, but, like, I think if you're going to make it a private run thing, now, because, you know, I mean, there is also arguments that, you know, why should government bureaucrats run it? That's obviously one thing. And, you know, like, why should workers run it? That's another thing. But I think that these basic industries, like roads, you can't have, like, 5 sets of highways. There's only one highway. And you can't have, like, you know, 5 sets of, like, electricity poles. You know, there only could be one. So these are just natural monopolies. Things that are public things, and they should run for the public. Now, in terms of, like, what do they mean by publicly owned, I'm going to take it a bit liberally and mean that they should be publicly served. But in terms of how they should be, like, run, like, publicly owned or privately owned, I don't know. I'm just going to be loose and put agree. Government intervention is a threat to the economy. Not always. I'm going to actually, maybe the first time I'm going to be neutral. That's too vague of a question for me. Like, what type of intervention? Those with a greater ability to pay should receive better health care. The thing with this is that I support universal health care. I just don't believe in the sort of the thing is that the thing with universal health care, in my opinion, the way I see it, is that everyone gets health care. And then if you want, like, the gold tier, like, people who, like, the most specialized people, it's kind of like public schools. Everyone could go to school. Like, you could go to a public school, but, you know, you could then go to a private school if you could afford it, right? And should they be able to do that? Hell yeah, they should. So I agree. Same thing with healthcare. So, like, everyone gets healthcare, but if you want, like, gold tier, like, you know, healthcare and, you know, you don't want to have taxpayers funded, you want to get, you know, something that's worth, you know, you want to pay $50,000 for the most elite type of surgery, then that's fine. I don't care. My purpose is to make sure everyone in the society has healthcare. That's my idea. But if you have more, if you could do more than that, then that's fine too. Quality education is a right of all people. I'm going to take this liberally and mean that we should provide people with education. In that case, I strongly agree. The means of production should belong to the workers who use them. No, I believe in the capitalist mode of production. In the sense that, you know, like, I first of all disagree with the whole fact that, you know, it's an oppressive construct that's, you know, workers are oppressed under a capitalist mode of production. First of all, like, they think that if workers, like, just seize the means and you know, they're like, okay, we're gonna now talk about, you know, where we're gonna, like, move our, you know, where we're gonna market and where we're gonna, like, get the materials. Workers aren't there for that. They're there to, like, hey, look, I have a skill set and I want to give it to you. You pay me, and it's a mutually beneficial relationship. Now, obviously, I agree with, like, you know, you have to give a minimum amount of payment. You have to give them not just but, you know, a good work conditions. I believe in all those social democratic points of view. But, you know, at the end of the day, I agree strongly with, how would you describe it? I agree strongly with the idea that, if you are an owner and you toil and sweat in your basement and you create an idea and you finally get the capital needed to start up your factory, okay, now I need workers. Why should the workers steal your factory? I have no clue about that. I do agree that, that rich person who made that idea, I think they should be able to get really rich. If you made a good idea, you should be able to take a good hunk of that. But, again, where I differ from complete free market capitalists is that I believe they should be able to get taxed, and they have to contribute back to their society, and they have to treat their workers well. But I don't fundamentally believe in the idea that they should be run by the government, or the workers should run them. The United Nations should be abolished. Ooh. So you might think that since I think we're here in the foreign policy section now. So the thing with this is that I don't necessarily. The United Nations is just a useless, toothless organization. But whatever, even if you want to, you could talk about restructuring it, in which case I would agree. But because I fundamentally believe in the idea of some sort of international body to work out disputes between nations and come on international projects. Let's say an asteroid's about to hit Earth and you needed all the nations to work together on that. That'd be fine. But the United Nations is starting to be very bureaucratic, and I don't like that. And it's also useless, and it's also kind of toothless. But the concept of the United Nations, an international body that I don't think should enforce things on nations, but it should be there to intermediate disputes. I agree with that. I don't think, I'm not too much of a nationalist where I become an isolationist. I just believe that international things shouldn't completely sabotage the national thing. So if the United Nations becomes some sort of federal, we're passing laws that are concrete, then I would oppose it and should be abolished. But right now I like the idea of just an international dispute intermediary in a way. So I'd slightly disagree. Military action by our nation is often necessary to protect it. Ooh, that's a good question. Depends. Military action by our nation is often necessary to protect it. Depends on the situation, my dude. Depends on the situation. I'm going to slightly disagree. Yeah, I'm not... not everything can be solved with a bomb. If you have a general in charge, everything they see could be solved with bombs. And if you put a State Department official in charge, everything they see can be solved with diplomacy. Sometimes diplomacy isn't the action. Sometimes military action is. Sometimes military action is not the answer, and sometimes diplomacy is. You need both. But I'm going to put neutral. I know I said I wasn't going to put neutral, but I'm going to put neutral for this one. I support regional unions such as the European Union. Now that they actually made a sort of a caveat there that what we're talking about is the European Union, I disagree with that. I like a sort of economic union. I'm fine with that, I guess. The thing is that for example, when they adopted the common currency, right? All the southern European countries got fucked because, now they can't manage their own currency. Another thing is what if you have a paused institution such as the European Union? I think, in my opinion, I've kind of warmed to the idea of the European Union. The thing with me is that I think the European Union should be taken over by far-right radicals and force more liberal nations to conform. Hey, how about that? Instead of it's hey, you're Sweden, you're acting suicidal, with all your immigration policy. We're going to force you to not do that. I know kind of conflicts with my nationalist side, but I'm going to just slightly disagree, though, still, despite what all I said. I still like the idea of, an independent nation state being able to control most of its affairs. I wouldn't be opposed to, a Sweden and Norway having a deal, but, if you have... Generally, I'm against like bigger world confederation type of things because I support the national interest. Is it important to maintain our national sovereignty? Strongly agree. If you don't, then you are not a nation. You are a subservient vassal state. A united world government would be beneficial to mankind. No, it would not. This is a impossible fantasy. Strongly disagree on that. You can't have a nation, a world with, with all these different, as long as people disagree, you will have nations. There's just too many different peoples, too many different cultures, too many different interests. The best you could do is have an intermediary where they could like work together on common issues. But no, a world government's ass. I don't know why someone from Tanzania should tell like a Canadian what to do. It is more important to retain peaceful relations than to further our strength. Well, sometimes having peaceful relations is strength. Now, I guess the question is like, should we like be, like, in terms of like, how would you describe it? It's more important to retain peaceful relations, huh? I would say, I would say, because like when they say strength, I don't think we should be like we have to enforce our wills. It's just that as long as we're independent, as long as we're able to run ourselves, I'm fine. I don't want to force our will on other nations. If we leave Afghanistan and then like the Afghani women get oppressed, I don't care. I don't really care. If they want to act like that, that's on Afghanistan to change it or keep it with however they want to do it. I don't think we should like further our goals above everyone. I'm gonna agree slightly because I think it's better to be like in a peaceful, okay, yes, maybe and the thing is, a lot of the times, like for example, we want to overthrow Syria. Why do we want to overthrow Syria? It's because they are allied with Russia, and Israel also wants him gone. But in terms for America, nothing. There's no reason why Syria can't be an ally or just be neutral towards them. So is it more, this whole like, oh, we're going to further our strength by toppling Syria, for example, that's just a misnomer. It's a complete fallacy and it shouldn't be done. And it's only because of so it depends on what they mean by like furthering our strength. Sometimes what it means by furthering our strength is furthering the strength of our supposed allies. And it's like geopolitical chessboarding, and it's like, well, I would rather, be peaceful with Russia, and I don't care if Russia annexes, like, like the Russian parts of Ukraine. I don't care, because, maybe it's more important to maintain peaceful relations with them than to escalate further and have Russia go into, like, Chinese hands, for example. So I'm going to slightly agree. Wars do not need to be justified to other countries. I agree. The reason being is that, like, you obviously have to, like, justify your wars. Wars can't just be, I don't agree with, like just wars just for the sake of just conquering. This is like a barbaric type of thing. You have your nation, and there's obviously going to be disputes. Like, hey, this is there's a historical or cultural or ethnic claim to this land. You could have disputes. There's always going to be disputes, but I don't think you could just flat out just conquer a nation just because willy-nilly. I think you need justifications, but like I don't agree with the fact I would be assuming that, if you agree with that, you just, for some reason, you were like, okay, well, if we declare war on, like, let's say Mexico invades, I don't know, Texas, and then we invade Mexico, we shouldn't justify it to, like, Japan, or the UN. We shouldn't grovel to them. But we should justify it. Like, hey, this is why we're doing it. But, like, it's not like we have to get permission from other countries, Military spending is a waste of money. Strongly disagree. I mean, this is just obvious. First of all, the one who's going to defend your nation if you're not going to? The thing with anarchist people is that they're like, we're just going to be a loose confederation of like trade unions or something like that, or individuals. Okay, well then a stronger state's going to come over and conquer everyone. Maybe you could shoot a few of their like soldiers, but you're not going to do anything of concrete note. International aid is a waste of money. That's a good question. Currently, yes, but international aid could be used to make a sort of like you know, like, it could be used to, like, you know, help people. Like the Marshall Plan, that was to stop the spread of communism in Western Europe. It's not always a waste of money. Currently, a lot of it is. I'm going to put neutral. My nation is great. I love America. I'm a nationalist. It doesn't matter, like, even if your country isn't the first place in healthcare, first place in education, first place in science, or first place in a lot of things. Maybe it's just in the shitter. You have to still like your nation and be like, okay, I love who we are, and let's make ourselves better. You can't just like, oh, our country's shit. Okay, our nation is shit. When I criticize American immigration policy, or when I criticize American foreign policy, I don't do it because I think America is shit. I think that I love America, but I want America to be better. So yeah, I love America. Research should be conducted on an international scale. I disagree with that. I mean, you know, if they want to, fine. But like why should we do that? It's not. Should is like kind of like a forceful, like word in my opinion. Government should be accountable to the international community. No, government should be more relied on the people, I would say. How would you say it? Yeah, I support more like for example, I believe in self-determination of people, but I don't believe in, like, you know, like for example, if let's say South Africa just started like massacring all the white people there, I mean, would I not do anything? Should they be accountable? That's a good question. But generally speaking, I don't think they should, like, you know, because right now it's kind of hard to a lot of the, you know, values that a lot of right-wing people oppose, like, you know, international intervention, which I'm not in favor of, like the intervention or you know, like schools teaching certain values. They're against that because right now what they mean by it, like for example, this could mean like, well, you know, they're not legalizing, they have criminalizing homosexuality, so we have to, like, you know, they have to be accountable for that. No, they shouldn't. But like, should they be accountable if, like, should I force Sweden? Let's say I became, like, you know, a lot of nations became far right in Europe and we took over the European Union and forced Sweden to, like, not genocide itself. Is that interfering in Swedish politics? Well, yeah, but it's for a good goal because the Sweden's getting taken over by leftists. Now, obviously, if you allow that power, you know, people could take over, and so it's a bit of an iffy thing. Same thing with schools. Just because they're teaching kids to, like, you know, about how bad all white people are, or like the, you know, like, oh, America's, you know, bad, or, you know, about, you know, butt sex, you know, all that. That doesn't mean we shouldn't teach them the right things, like how great America is, or like the virtues of hard work and like chastity and, you know, being honesty. You know, the government has a role in a lot of things. It's just that the power is being abused by leftists. Now the question is, should that power be invoked at all? The big thing for me is that it's just because it's taken over by leftists doesn't mean we can't use it for a right-wing thing. So, though, it's a good question. Though, generally speaking, when you allow the government to just, like, you know, like, I'm going to just slightly disagree on that. Even when protesting an authoritarian government, violence is not acceptable. I agree slightly on that. Generally, I'm opposed to violence. A lot of people who do want to be violent are usually, like, these tough guys who aren't going to actually do anything. Though, you know, like, you know, when the Polish people resisted the Nazis, you know, I mean, it was that bad. I mean, they resisted violently. Though generally, in the current modern world, generally, you shouldn't be, like, first of all, like, even if, notwithstanding morally, like, what are you going to do? Like, bomb, you know, I don't know, like, kill a post office? Like, what are you going to do? You know? I don't know. Generally, I'm against violence. My religious values should be spread as much as possible. Ooh. So, before I said they shouldn't, I'm going to be more neutral here. I want to put agree. The thing with this is that, so, the difference from last time is that I'm a Christian now. Now, what do they mean by religious values? Like, do I believe that the government should spread, you know, like, around the world? I don't think so. I think, you know, if Saudi Arabia wants to remain Muslim, that's on them. I just want the Christendom to remain Christian, right? And they have different values. We have different values. What about within the countries? That's a different thing too. And what do they mean by, you know, like, should the government, like, what's the context of this? So in one view, I agree with this, and in another view, I don't. So I'm gonna put neutral. So like in one view, it's like it should be like spread by force, and like everyone should adopt it. I don't agree with that. You know, should the government like take the good moral teachings from certain, like from say Christianity and from like traditional like views of life and spread that within the population? I agree with that. So because there's a lot of ways to interpret it, I'm gonna put neutral. Same thing with this. But generally, like, you know, you could convince me either way on that. I kind of believe, like, for example, the government should not be apathetic. The government should enforce a certain, it's just a matter of what the moral standards are. But I think, but, you know, it just depends on, like, do they mean on the world or within the nation? It's like, I'm not going to force Saudi Arabia, as I said, to be Christian, but am I going to, like, take these values and enforce, like, have them permeate through society? Yeah, and it's just a matter of, like, how do we do that? The general populace makes poor decisions. That's a good question. Generally, that's a very good question. The thing is, for me, it's less about democracy, and it's more of doing the right thing. If the people do something that's absolutely dog shit, I don't want the people to, you know, have this be part of their, like, I don't want the people, just because it's democratically mandated doesn't mean we would go through with it. Though democracy could be a good way to, like, you know, have justifications, could be one way to justify things, but do they usually make poor decisions? I think that's a very good question. I'm going to put, I'm not in favor of democracy, really, but I don't want to say, yeah, it kind of makes it like, yeah, do they sometimes make poor decisions? Yeah, but not always. Ooh, victimless crimes, such as drug use, should not be crimes at all. Ooh. No, there should be, even things that don't necessarily have a victim. I do agree that that, you know, there has to be sometimes, like, for example, if you produce heroin, you know, maybe you're not victimizing people, but you're victimizing not just morally, but also people who use it. You know, you're not forcing them to get addicted, but your actions do, despite them having a victimless crime, it is in the government and societal interest to stop you, and it should be a crime, and you should be thrown in jail. Now, a lot of the victimless crime shouldn't be treated just by, like, throwing people in jail. There's alternatives to incarceration, but crimes, you know, when you're convicted of a crime, that doesn't necessarily mean you go to jail. You know, maybe you go to rehab or something like that. And also, you know, so drug producers and traffickers should obviously go to prison, but, like, you know, like, if you're caught with, like, I don't know, like, if you're an addict, you shouldn't go to prison, but you should be, the government should, like, okay, listen, you're going to be doing this and that, and, you know, you're going to be in a rehab center and yada yada. So there's obviously, you know, not every single thing I don't like that the government, like, morally should be punishable by jail. We could determine what exactly is the appropriate measure the government should take. Should it even be a crime? Should it be just something that's, like, you know, like, discouraged, right? Through the moral systems, or, you know, things like that. But it should, just because it's a victimless crime doesn't mean it just should not be a crime at all. I disagree slightly with that. Obviously, not everything should, you know, sometimes it's also a balance of not everything that's immoral, so to speak, should be, you know, punishable by prison or you know, crime, right? Like, let's say you know, for example, we might say lying is bad, right? But, like, what if you know, your father doesn't allow you to, I don't know, I'm trying to make an example that's kind of innocent. Let's say you don't allow, your family doesn't allow you to eat in your room, right? And then you take a box of crackers and bring it to your room. And then your dad's like, where did the crackers go? And you're like, oh, I don't know. And then, like, they figure you out. Should you go to prison for lying? Well, okay, I mean, was it wrong of you just to lie about it? Okay, maybe, morally. Let's say someone does something good for you and you don't say thank you. Should have you been grateful and said thank you back? Yeah, maybe that's what you should have done, but are you going to get thrown in prison for that? No. But I don't think just because, so there's a spectrum. But there is somewhere on that spectrum things that aren't necessarily violent crime or victimful crimes, such as you producing heroin, that should be punishable by prison. And this is not even just prison. It's like if it was like it's like just crimes. No, sometimes they should be crimes. The sacrifice of some civil liberties is necessary to protect us from acts of terrorism. So that's a. Oh, hold up. Did I answer the last question? It should not be crimes. I disagree. The sacrifice of some civil liberties is necessary to protect us from acts of terrorism. Well, depends on what you mean. Generally, I'm against, the way we're fighting terrorism, at least in the war on terror, is extremely for example, off-putting. I think that this mass surveillance apparatus is horrible. I think this, sometimes the government is overreaching in its bounds. I think that there is a role for protecting, but I think, as I mentioned, I think last video, the last time I did this, the best protection is not to import people who are, violent and going to do this type of terrorism. So, and, it depends, and, what do you mean by some civil liberties? Let's just suspend due process. Well, no, let's not do that. Or else you just don't have a society, or at least a civilized one. But, obviously, for example, there's, because the word some is throwing me off. If it's, the sacrifice of civil liberties is necessary, I would strongly disagree. Some, I could, for example, if a terrorist bombs and kills, say, 20 people, and then we arrest him and everything, and then, is putting him to death a violation of his civil liberties? Maybe, but I think that should be done. So I'm going to put actually neutral. Because the way, at least in the modern sense of the word, when we say we have to protect us from terrorism, it's we're going to import everyone here, and then we're just going to spy on everyone. That's a horrible idea. How about we just blockade people from coming in here who are going to do this type of stuff, and just not, you don't have to have a strong police state if you don't have, if the people are moral and upstanding and actually good. But if you have a bunch of people just don't trust each other, people just rob and rape and everything each other, then yeah, you might have to have a stronger state. In an ideal world, people wouldn't have to think about terrorism because terrorism isn't happening because we don't have people who want to send us back to the Stone Age. I'm neutral. Actually, I'm gonna put disagree slightly. Government surveillance is necessary in the modern world. Current surveillance? No, but yes, it is necessary. I'm gonna put slightly agree. I'm gonna put neutral actually on that one. The very existence of the state is a threat to our liberty. Now that is funny. Strongly disagree. The thing with that is that what was the question? Yeah, the state thing. No, the state is the whole reason why, we have a civilized society. The whole reason why a state exists, and we're able to, have an orderly society, a society that is able to create high art and high culture, and we're able to think and build great things and make great things and just produce great things and be able to live happy, productive lives. The only reason why we have that is because we form together in a political unit, which is a natural part of our state. No man's a one-man island. The state is not a necessary threat to your liberty. It can be, but it's the only reason why you have liberty. Otherwise, if you don't have a state, the only reason you have liberty is based on the action. If there's a stronger biker gang and they say, you know what, we want your wife, and you can't resist them, well then, you don't really have liberty. Because you're weak. Regardless of political opinions, it's important to side with the country. I slightly agree. The thing is that it depends on what you mean by that. A lot of time, for example, if we were in Iraq, I obviously disagree with that. I think, and for example, if I think the United States government. So here's the thing: there's a difference between the government and the people. I 100% disagree with the American government enforcing its immigration policy on the American nation. So. But it's just because the American immigration system or American foreign policy is horrible doesn't mean America itself is horrible. It's the government's actions that are. We want to, the fundamental character of the nation to be preserved. And if it's hijacked, then you need to take it back. So I think it's just a matter of interpreting this question. You know, like, if you interpret it as just, like, you know, siding with whatever your country does, then no. But, because, you know, then there's, everyone's countries has done something they disagree with. And they're like, well, I didn't side my country then. The thing is, you should always, whenever you want to fix something, though, you're doing it because you want the American nation to be better. So you're siding with the country, even though your country did something dumb. And you're like, okay, we're going to do something better for it. So slightly agree. All authority should be questioned. Oh, that's a good question. So the thing with this is that a lot of people say you should just question authority all the time. Well, sometimes authority shouldn't be questioned. Like, what if, like, a child's like, you know what, I question my father's authority. It's like, it's kind of dumb, to be quite honest. Because sometimes you just accept authority. As someone who, you know, kind of was in Marine Corps boot camp, for example, was I in the position to question? Now, obviously, you can't just blindly follow people, but sometimes it's just a matter of, like, your value. Like, if you value your nation, or you put your faith in God, why do you question this? You know, you might, if you have if you have standards, you obviously will, you know, if you want to protect your family or your nation and you lay down your life for it, you know, why you weren't like some big brain, like, enlightenment thing. You're like, oh, well, why do I do that? Like, is this like a natural thing? Is this good? You just do it because you have standards. And sometimes when you know, like, sometimes, like, if you're getting led, say, in a military, like, some people say that, you know, sometimes you don't question people in the military. That's true. But you know, like, what if you know, your person's like going to lead you to a suicide, you know, and it's just for nothing? What if the person's here to, like, do something? You know, sometimes you do have to question. But all authority? That's a good question. So I'm between neutral and agree. Because, you know, the time for like, for example, even the other side is like, well, for authorities, like, well, do you question God? Obviously, if you believe in God, you don't. But the time for questioning it is when you want to figure out if you want to have faith in it. Once you have faith in it, then you don't question it. Because you're like, I just have faith. If you just don't believe anything all the time, then you don't really, you won't be able to actually have firm roots and things. But I'm going to put slightly agree. I'm kind of, with the caveat that, like, you can't just, if you question everything, you're going to be, you know, you're going to be kind of, how do I put it, just floating in the abyss. But though, you have to also question, so it's both. A hierarchical state is best. It is the only type of state that would exist. It is natural, not just in a government, but in a so not just in a government, but also in a in the natural world. There will always be hierarchy. I mean, you know, decentralization is, you know, like a decentralized hierarchy, it just won't exist. So hierarchy will always exist. So by definition, it will be the only type of state that is allowed, or that will come about, I should say. It is important that the government follows the majority opinion, even if it is wrong. No. If the people vote for more immigration, I'm not going to do it. The thing is, for me, it's run by values and the outcomes. It's not run based on, like, oh, well, what, you know, like, if the people want it, that's fine, that's more justification. But it's like, sometimes, you know, what we need is, if it's the wrong decision, then, you know, we can't just go follow. You have a moral obligation not to do it. Now, obviously, it's like, well, you know, then the people in power are just gonna do what they want and not what the people want, because they think what they want is better than what the people want. So obviously, it can be abused. It can't be like, for example, if, like, they vote a politician out, the politician's like, well, I think I'm better, so I'm gonna not, you know, I'm gonna stay. Obviously, you can't, like, it can't be an absolute value where, like, just because it's democratic and you might not like it doesn't mean that you can't follow it, or you don't follow it. But it's like, you know, if the people are voting to, you know, there's some things in life that, I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna just put slightly disagree on that, because the thing is that you can't just, you know, if you have standards, if you have moral standards in life, you understand you have certain things you value. If people want your family to be like thrown in a blender, you're like, well, I don't care if people want it, I'm not doing it. If people want, you know, to go to Iraq and bomb it, I'm not gonna do it. If people want immigration to like replace the, you know, the peoples of European descent, right? I'm not gonna do it. But, you know, like, what if, you know, it just depends on, like, you know, you can't, there's a certain things that just because it's if the democratic mandate is given, I'm not going to do it. But you can't do it for everything, obviously. So that's why I put just slightly disagree. The stronger the leadership, the better. Yeah, I agree with that. If you don't have a strong leader, you don't really, I mean, that's, when someone's in power and wielding that power that the state has, you need someone who actually knows, not just strong though, but also like a moral and wise leader, not just someone who's just a big brain person, you know, like who's just like, oh, I'm strong, but, you know, like a wise leader as well. Democracy is more than a decision-making process. Yeah, democracy itself, just the question, I mean, so like the democracy itself is more of a thought, like, you know, it's like an ideology too, that, you know, about majority rules and things like that. So it's more than just like deciding things. Environmental regulations are essential. I strongly agree with that. We could debate what environmental regulations are needed, but you can't just the environment will take a downturn if you just leave things up to their own devices, because people don't really care that there's more trees and there's more breathable atmosphere. I mean, people care, but it's like they don't think in the long term, they think in the short term. So you need environmental regulations to accommodate that. And that's also a libertarian thing. You have to internalize your costs too. A better world will come from automation, science, and technology. That's a very, very good question. I don't know. It can bring about good stuff. Like, for example, computers have brought, I think the question is that it's not that technology won't bring about good stuff. It's just that it brings about its own bad stuff too. So with the advent of, you know, all this technology, you know, have brought about, you know, maybe better connectivity and better research and more information, but maybe it leads you to be more addicted to, you know, maybe it allows you to be exposed to pornography at an earlier age. Maybe it gets you exposed to, you know, too much information and too much, and to maybe fake news or something like that, as they say. So it's a double-edged thing, so I'm gonna put neutral. It's a matter of like getting the benefits of technology and science, but also mitigating the bad effects of it. It's not like, and it's the way we will respond to these new technological developments that will determine if a better world will come. Because it's possible, but it's not just because we're more automated and have more science. That doesn't mean a better world will come. In fact, sometimes that might lead to bad stuff if it's not regulated properly. So I'm going to put neutral. Children should be educated in religious or traditional values. Now, that is something I 100% agree with. I think it should be in the education systems. I think it should be permeated through the media and corporations. Obviously, we could debate what exactly is a religious or traditional value. But I fundamentally believe that if we look back at the traditional values of, you know, just list, you know, like things that, you know, we might think is antiquated nowadays because it's like against the, but, you know, the reason why they're traditional is they're tested and true, and not just that, they are a gateway that preserves our identity too. And they're also, you know, they lead to better societies. Now, you know, sometimes some traditional values might not, but, you know, a lot of people say just because they're traditional and they're from the past, oh, that's an oppressive construct, we have to get rid of it. Well, we have to understand that these traditions not just define who we are as a nation, as a people, they have been tested before, and they actually make you a better person too. So strongly agree. Traditions have no value on their own. Just strongly disagree. The thing is that not everything needs to have some sort of purpose. That's a big thing in our, at least, capitalist libertarian system, is that everything has to have a purpose. You know, and, you know, like, for example, Christmas. What's the point of like you buying a Christmas tree and putting it up and getting all its like those like things all over your floor that you have to clean up? You know, isn't that just a big hassle? Like, why do you do that? Like, what's the point of it? Sometimes there doesn't have to be a point to it. And some people are like, well, it's because it brings you happiness. Well, it doesn't even have to, like, you don't have to be mechanically thinking like okay, I do this because it's good for me, or it gives me a benefit. You don't have to think like, sometimes just do shit because, hell, let's do it. You know, we're gonna celebrate Christmas. We're gonna invite everyone over. We're gonna have for Thanksgiving. We're gonna have a turkey, and we're gonna like share. You know, we're gonna do all this. Why? There doesn't have to be a why. You know. Just traditions don't. Not everything has to have some sort of like value, like an economic value to it. Like what's its usefulness? What's its utility? Sometimes the best things in life are things that don't really have a utility. So, I'm going to disagree. Religion should be a role in government. Disagree on that slightly. I think that I'm in favor of an established state church in Europe. Maybe, I know this is blasphemous to say, but I do think that at the very least, I'm kind of lukewarm on the idea of establishing at least a not a state religion, a recognition that like this is the religion of our nation. But like, you know, I don't think that it should like guide government like policy, like, you know, preach shouldn't be. But I think that religion does have a good role to play in civil society. And plus, you also, if you have religion involved in government, government will be involved in religion. Churches should be taxed the same way other institutions are taxed. I disagree with that. I think that churches, at least ideally, would provide not just moral and spiritual guidance and a sense of community to the communities they serve, but also they provide charity and, you know, other such things. They have such a churches, at least in the traditional sense, provide so much like stuff. Like they're the perfect, like the ideal. Not just they serve as like community, like a way communities come together. They serve as ways to instill morals and, you know, a sense of actual right and wrong into the population, and gives people like a higher minded purpose to their life. I think it gives also you know, services to the poor and the downtrodden. I think they have a lot of things, and you know, in my ideal society, they would play a huge influential role in helping society, and doing things that the government sometimes can't do or shouldn't do. And the more churches do that, you know, the less government there has to be. So I do agree that we shouldn't just be taxing it, because it's not just like a business; it's also like a thing that the government should subsidize and help, because they do so much great for our society. Climate change is currently one of the greatest threats to our way of life. I agree. There's a lot of I'm gonna agree that's one of the biggest things. Again, I think I mentioned this, but so there's demographic replacement. That's my main greatest threat. But I think environmental destruction and the way we're gonna live with the environment is like the second biggest thing. So I agree. It's important that we work as a united world to combat climate change. Well, I mean, it's kind of, when it comes to like global warming, right, or climate change, it will require worldwide effort. Now, obviously, a lot of that caveat is they call it like watermelon politics in Europe. Basically, like, well, you see that you know, we're gonna push environmentalism, but it's all for like the purposes of internationalism and socialism, which is something I obviously am against. But by definition, we're gonna have to work with other countries to help make sure we can make the world a safe place for our environment. I'm gonna slightly agree on that. Man, damn. Society was better many years ago than it is now. I'm gonna put neutral on that. The thing with this is that with society is that depends on what they mean by that. The thing is that back in the day, we lost a few things that I think we should regain back. And I think that's what the conservatives and right-wing people want. They want to restore the things that we lost, things of more stronger families. They want, better, a sense of community, identity, roots. Like in the old days, people had a tight-knit community. They could rely on each other. They had their own, they knew their place in life. They were certain where they were in life. They had a higher purpose with religion, and they just knew they had certainty, they had order, and I think it's purpose and certainty. and also and just having guidance and all that. I think those are things we've lost in modern life. I think obviously though I wouldn't want to live in like the 1700s because there's also like plagues and I could get a cut on my finger and I die. So obviously it's as we progress technologically, we have to make sure that our cultural and moral foundations aren't sabotaged. So it's either or. It depends on what they mean by. So in that the first things I mentioned, yes, but we're better off now materially. I mean, that's without a doubt. But in some ways we're not. So both. So neutral. It's important that we maintain the traditions of our past. Strongly agree. I mean, if we're not, traditions are one of the biggest indicators of how to preserve your identity. They kind of define who you are. Why do we celebrate Thanksgiving? Why? Why don't you do it? And usually when you talk about even people who don't buy into all that, like the most liberal people, kind of the atmosphere of Christmas, it affects them in a certain way. And I think that it just defines who we are, and it's just sometimes, like as I mentioned before, like why do you question Christmas? Like why should we? Obviously no one believes in and even if you want to take the silly parts of it, not just like the real part, but like let's say Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. These are fairy tales, obviously, but why shouldn't we teach our we tell our children that the Santa Claus is coming down? Like what's the harm in it? And what's it's not just if it's harmful or not. It's just that it's traditions. There's much more to life, as I mentioned, than just the utility of an idea or a product. Sometimes the best things in life are immaterial. Just like what's a good example? Just in your let's say you're celebrating Christmas and your family's all around, you're opening your presents. It's not the presents. It's not like getting stuff is the purpose of it. Or it's like, oh, we're just doing this because it increases the GDP by increasing spending. That's not the purpose. It's the immaterial. It's the family. It's the gifts and the generosity. It's it's all those types of things. Okay, so it is important that we think in the long term beyond our lifespans. I strongly agree with that. The reason being is that I think Orwell and Good made a good thing about time preferences. It's always stuck to me because it's a very good explanation. When you think in the long term, when you understand you're not just an atomized individual, that if you look back on your past and look back into your future, you realize you have a duty to preserve what you have and give it to your children. And if you think in terms of things of decades and hundreds of years, you set your life in order. If you just live for what's right now, you could hey, what's good right now? Let me just have casual sex with a stranger and inject myself with heroin. That might be good right now, but that has devastating consequences and for an individual. And then things for broader society as well. If you have a society that thinks in decades and centuries, you have a much more society that's resilient and able to think and plan ahead than a country that's just, is in this atomized, nihilistic, hellscape and who are just spiraling towards self-destruction because it's just what matters now. That's what's the focus. Reason is more important than maintaining our culture. I disagree with that. For example, it might be rationally, maybe, for example, maybe it's rational that we shouldn't waste all the cookies telling our kids to give cookies out to Santa Claus because Santa Claus isn't real. That's rationally speaking, that's true. But why should we get rid of our tradition of maybe telling our children to have cookies and for the Santa Claus? I'm making a small example to illustrate my point. Sometimes just because it's facts and logic doesn't mean we have to deconstruct it all. You could deconstruct through facts and logic your identity and your, and this is I think this is a place philosophers go in, but when you have a society where you deconstruct your identity and deconstruct your, deconstruct your morality and deconstruct your, meaning of life, then you're left with a husk of nothing. And so, just because it's rational, for example, what's your meaning in life? We have our own meanings in life, but, sometimes a lot of them aren't rational. Sometimes they maybe are they're not really thought through factually. They're kind of more emotional, right? But that doesn't mean, just because it's not made through a deduction of reason, that doesn't mean you don't go through with it. as I said, there are things that are beyond just the material facts and logic type of thing. So I slightly disagree, because reason is important in terms, especially when it comes to actually the concrete stuff, like, you know, like figuring out, like, you know, how does the weather work? You can't just be emotional about that. There is a certain answer to that, which is you have to be done through the scientific method. But there's things that are just not based on that, and we can't just deconstruct our whole culture by reason. Drug use should be legalized or decriminalized. Ooh, that's a good question. Depends on the drug. Obviously not all. Like, no, there's some drugs that can be used for medicinal purposes. Like, for example, like, we do use opioids to help you, like, if you get crashed and there's pain. That's true. But generally speaking, so this is about drug use. I think our drug war has been, there is reform needed for drugs. I think that nonviolent drug offenders, and, like, you know, I think they do, there has to be alternatives to incarceration. Now, I've seen a lot about weed. I think weed should be legalized. I hate to say it, but I could be dissuaded from that, but I don't think it's as bad as, like, alcohol. But in my opinion, I don't think drug use, like, you know, if you're gonna smoke cocaine, you know, like, I think that should be stopped. I think you should be put in, like, a rehab center, and the people who try to distribute cocaine and produce it should be thrown in jail. So, no. Now, they threw decriminalization in there, but even then, like, I'm not going to, like, decriminalize all drug use. So I'm going to slightly disagree on that. Drug use, again, as I mentioned before, the government does have a vested interest in telling you what to do. I don't believe in the libertarian fantasy of, like, everything goes, and just, if it doesn't harm anyone, you should get out of the way. I don't believe in that. The government does have a, if people who say, like, who cares if you live in a neighborhood where people do heroin, I've never been around people who've done heroin. You know, so, because, again, as I said, you're not an atomized individual. Same-sex marriage should be legal. I have a feeling I had some more to say about drugs. But yeah, a lot of people say, well, the drug wars has failed. The government shouldn't tell you what to do, and that's why they should be legal or decriminalized. My thing is, first of all, they do have a right to tell you what to do. Now, it's just a matter of what is that. Like, they can't force you to, like, go to bed at a certain time, right? We could debate on, like, what exactly. But, you know, we understand that certain activities should be limited. And then it's also, okay, now that we understand they should be limited, by what means? By the law? By, like, punishment? By fines? By, there's many different options on how we could stop it, right? And for me, I think that the government has a right to decrease drug use. And then it's just a matter of what type of drugs and at what way. You know, for example, marijuana, maybe that could be more liberalized. Things like hard drugs like heroin should be controlled. I think that it's not just, you know, for example, if you're and I think that, you know, certain drugs, like, for example, LSD, that's not as harmful as heroin, right? Now, maybe LSD is illegal, but someone who produces LSD might not get as much as prison time than a person who produces fentanyl, right? So we would determine, like, what exactly is the right punishment, what exactly should be legal, but the whole idea that, oh, well, just because it's a victimless crime, it should be, you know, legalized, I don't agree with that. Same-sex marriage should be legal. No, I disagree. Marriage isn't just like, oh, we just really, 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 really love someone. Because that's the current modern definition, and by that definition, there really is not a purpose for denying same-sex marriage. But there is a purpose to marriage. Marriage is, we understand, first of all, marriage is for children. And then second of all, we understand that the difference between the virtues and the traits of a man and the virtues and traits of a woman, they come together and form a cohesive form, because that's how nature was supposed to make it. Like, the mother has a nurturing maternal instinct, the father has paternal masculine influence. They both come together that all children need. And I mentioned this in my family video that boys need fathers mostly, but they also need a little bit of that mother thing, and girls need mothers mostly, but they also need a little bit of that father thing. It's like a yin and yang. So yeah, the marriage isn't just like, oh, it's just like the most best thing in the world, and you know, no, I disagree with that, because marriage isn't just like you love someone really, really much. It's part of that, but it's more than just that. There's a lot of there's a reason why the government makes marriage have like tax benefits and such like that. I would go further, but marriage should be protected, and same-sex marriage is, if same-sex, I'm not gonna like arrest people who like are gay, but I also think this is another thing where we should discourage homosexuality. Just for the there's a lot of bad, it's not an equal. Again, it's not like we have to treat everything equally. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna throw you in jail, but it shouldn't be like put on equal status, in my opinion. No cultures are superior to others. That is just demonstrably false. Now that being said, I'm not gonna like force like in Afghanistan or Pakistan, where they're like the most backwards people on the planet. Like, I'm not going to force them to change their ways, but there is certain cultures and certain societies based. Now, this is the controversial point: ethnically, culturally. Now, because some people are just there's IQ differences. But there's also culture that plays a role. And with culture, there's also the moral system. Like, what do they value? If you value a warrior society, you will get a warrior bloodlust society. If you value science, you will get a scientific society. So certain values, certain cultures produce different outcomes. And there are certain outcomes where I want to live in. I want to live in there's a reason why I want to live in Norway rather than Pakistan. Sex outside marriage is immoral. That's a good question. So immoral. Now here's the thing I definitely agree with. I think we definitely need to like prohibit, like discourage it, right? But I think that I don't think that just because it's outside marriage, it's necessary like immoral. Like I think immoral is the wrong word for it. I think it's like bad. I think it's better that I think it's virtuous to be waiting till marriage, and I think that should be what's promoted in our institutions. But I think just because you have sex with someone before marriage doesn't mean you're like an immoral person. But I think it should be a discouraged act, if you know what I mean. So I'm gonna put just neutral on this. If we accept migrants at all, it is important that they assimilate into our culture. Strongly agree. That is, if we take migrants at all, we shouldn't. I mean, if I was Sweden and I took in Norwegian people, that's fine. But we shouldn't be taking Somalis. Abortion should be prohibited in most or all cases. So, in my opinion, abortion is... I'm starting to... I'm getting, like, radicalized by abortion. It used to be, I still, and to this day, I still support abortion for, like, the first trimester, like, the first, like, 3 or 4 months or something, right? But I think afterwards, it should be banned. Like, I think late-term abortion should be a criminal offense unless the mother's gonna die. And I think also abortion should be allowed if there's, like, Down syndrome or, like, a mental defect or a physical defect. But I think it's a balance. I don't think it's always, should be in all cases. So I'm going to put slightly disagree. The thing is, though, I really wish this is the case, that we have less abortion. I think abortion is a horrible act. We should definitely discourage its use. But I don't think that an abortion in like the first month or so is something that should be prohibited. I think I would really like to see abortion to be more stigmatized, and I'm actually starting to be. I think I would consider myself pro-life, because the pro-life position, at least in the United States, is we don't want late-term abortion, and the pro-choice position is, and that's what they're fighting for. They want abortion up until birth. So I'm gonna put neutral. Gun ownership should be prohibited for those without a valid reason. The thing with gun ownership is that I support how would you say it, ways for I support people being I obviously support the Second Amendment. I support the right to keep and bear arms. I think that fundamentally people will, it's the culture, to be honest. Same thing with drugs too, to be quite honest, but though drugs are a bit more deadly than guns are. I think you know, if you live in like El Salvador, you know, and having like, you know, would it be a bad thing if assault weapons are suddenly being able to be sold there? Well, yeah. But I don't really buy that more guns equals less crime, just from the data I've seen. But, you know, if you live in like a Switzerland or a Finland where like people actually have a lot of gun ownership, you actually don't necessarily have to see a huge increase in crime or gun, you know, mass shootings. I think this mass shooting phenomenon is a result of like it's a new process of mentally ill people where before they would have just blown their brains out, now they want to make a show of it. Because this haven't happened before. We had looser gun laws before all this, and then now that, you know, they started doing it, we started restricting it, but it hasn't stopped it. So it's not like, you know, it was like it's not like, because before, you know, you would have expected, if it was just guns, we would expect mass shootings all throughout, at the rate we've seen it throughout all of history, you know, throughout all of American history, but we haven't, and it's like a recent phenomenon. But no, I think that, you know, if I want a gun to protect myself, that's a valid reason. I don't really see why not. Obviously, we could determine which ones is which. I think it's more of the gun culture that matters, but I definitely believe in a people's right to protect themselves. So, slightly disagree on that. I support universal single-payer healthcare. I mismatched that, strongly agree. I did this with a discussion with Forum for Conservatism. I'm going to just break it down very, very simply here. Single payer universal healthcare, at least the way I see it, in like a Canadian type of way, it will cut costs, simplify the federal bureaucracy, cover everyone. It would get rid of this complex web system where it's like, oh, this is out of network, blah, blah, blah. It would increase our health outcomes. It would also help businesses because businesses don't have to take care of the healthcare anymore. And for all those reasons, I strongly agree. I've not really, now, you know, there's disagreements you can make on like how exactly, what ways how do we raise money for it. I think it's through a payroll tax. It also saves people money, even if it's like a payroll tax. You know, it's also like what should be covered. What about private insurance? What about illegal immigrants? Obviously, illegal immigrants don't get anything in my system. Private insurance is still allowed under my system. And for me, it's just making sure people can have basic health care. And if you want elite health care, as I mentioned earlier, you can still have it. Prostitution should be illegal. I agree with that. I don't think that prostitution should be again, there's moral, the government has a duty to run moral, you know, like let's say, you know, you're a married couple and you are a little bit more kinky than just vanilla missionary sex, right? That's not, I don't think the government should ban you from being a little bit kinky. But, like, if we're going to have, like, brothels springing up everywhere and, like, people just having promiscuous sex all the time, I don't think that's something the government should allow. I think it should continuously, I think that, again, with, like, all these types of things like drugs and everything, I think the pimps should be arrested and thrown in jail. I think human traffickers should be thrown in jail, like a lot of these porn companies. But I think that prostitution in and of itself, I think like the prostitute, I think they should be reformed. I don't think it's just like, oh, you're a prostitute, you should be thrown in prison. Obviously, it's just a matter of like what exactly is the right action the government should take. But it's not like, oh, well, the government doesn't have a right to tell you what to do with prostitution, so you should just legalize it. I disagree with that. That's why I slightly agree with the idea of prostitution remaining an illegal act. Maintaining family values is essential. Well, yes, strongly agree on that. The whole purpose, I think that's one of the biggest things that they should do is encourage family formation. Now, family values is, you know, like what do they mean by that? But in my opinion, my family values is promoting families and pronatalism and, you know, having children. I think that's a great thing. I think that's actually kind of the purpose of our civilization, to preserve what we have and then give it to our children. And so to chase progress at all, and by the way, it's like, you know, as I mentioned in my family video, children growing up in a two-parent household are the most productive. This is like a material thing too. It's like, it's great for society. Like, they're less likely to be in crime, less likely to use welfare, less likely to develop like mental health issues, less likely to do drugs, less likely to drop out of school, etc., etc. But in terms of all that though, it that's like a material. It's also just like, you know, kind of more of an abstract thing too. So, you know, people, you know, having a stable society where people could grow and get where children could not just fulfill, you know, give a purpose to the man and a woman's life, but also this is the purpose of the society's life. This is a new, you know, if I was in like Poland, a new Polish child is born. We're going to be leaving Poland to this person, and we want to make sure it's better and preserved with its identity in place, and we give it the best growth. And it's just a way, gives them stable and roots in this life. So it's good for children, it's good for the family, it's good for society, and etc. To chase progress at all costs is dangerous. Strongly agree. Just because it's progression doesn't mean it's a good thing, you know? Genetic modification is a force for good, even on humans. I'm going to slightly agree with that. The thing with all this is that I'm not against like genetic engineering. Obviously, there has to be ethical practices in it. But, you know, if it's like, hey, we're going to get rid of like Down syndrome, or like, you know, where you're gonna like die from like a brain tumor in the age of 1 or something if we don't get rid of it. I'm agreeing with that, but you have to be you have to take precautions to make sure we don't, you know, this is a big move, like a big power, and you have to use it wisely. So I put slightly agree. So it could be a force for good, but you have to kind of be wary of it. We should open our borders to immigration. Nope. I mean, my whole channel is basically like, we have to preserve the identities of peoples and their nation states, and I fundamentally agree with that. You know, I don't believe in mass-scale immigration. It's bad for the country, it's bad for the workers, it's bad for the environment, it's bad for the social services. Overall, a bad thing. Governments should be as concerned about foreigners as they are about their own citizens. No, I disagree. The thing, I would put strongly disagree, but I'm going to put slightly disagree because they should care about, like, you know, if a foreigner trespasses from Mexico into America, then they should, like, oh, here's a foreigner, getting rid of him. But I don't think that's what they mean, so I'm going to put strongly disagree, actually. All people, regardless of factors like culture or sexuality, should be treated equally. And in terms of the last question, it's the citizenry are the main constituents of the nation. The Danes are the people of Denmark, and the Danish state is there to preserve who they are as a homeland for the Danish race, and their culture, and their identity, and their language, and their religion, etc., etc., etc. Now, so, you know, it's, let me see. So it's not like, oh, the government should just care about everyone. No, their main concern is the citizenry and the people in it, not everyone. All people, regardless of factors like culture or sexuality, should be treated equally. No, we have to preserve our own culture that is dominant. We have to preserve our own language. The English language is dominant over others. In terms of sexuality, I think the only one that's not just moral, but the one that's most healthy, the most correct, is a heterosexual one that is, and usually it's, you know, you save yourself for marriage. I think that's the perfect, the government should preserve, you know, like, hey, don't, like, do anal sex. Now, you know, I'm not going to arrest you if you do it. I think that's a bit too much infringement from the government, but, you know, like, that's worse for you. It's not equal to having regular sex, right? Because there's more societal ills from, like, having the more, you know, like, different types of sexuality. So there is a certain sexual standard that the government should be like, this is a good one. Then the culture, obviously, this is just common sense, so I just disagree. They shouldn't treat everything equally. They have certain, if you have standards at all, if a government has something to preserve, they will always be exclusionatory towards others, which is good, actually. Last question. It is important that we further my group's goals above all others. So finally, to this question, this is a big purpose of, at least in my state, not in my state, like the purpose of, like, in my ideal state, country. The purpose of, let's take let's take Italy. The purpose of the Italian state is to preserve the Italian people and their way of life. And it doesn't matter if, you know, the Somalis want to get a better life in Italy. Damn them, they have to be in Somalia to preserve Italy. There's a lot of neoliberal types that's like, oh, why do you hate the global poor? Don't you think that, like, you know, we have to sacrifice some of our, like, you know, production capacity and our way of life to help poor people from, like, you know, the third world? No, I don't believe that. I would sacrifice 10,000 third world people for, like, you know, if it means, like, helping one American out. Or, you know, if I was in Italy, I would sacrifice 10,000 Somalis to make sure one Italian gets saved. So yeah, that's just human, you know, nature. It's tribalism. And the purpose of the state is to preserve that identity. That's just the whole purpose of it. If you don't have it, then what's the purpose of your state? So yeah, strongly agree on that. Right-wing populist. That's kind of, I kind of spoke shit about democracy all the time. Well, right-wing populist. Interesting. That is an interesting proposal. So, centrist economically. I think this is a good split. I am in favor of markets. I don't really like how they make it equality versus markets. I think it should be more like laissez-faire versus like, you know, I don't know how exactly, but I wouldn't say I'm more for equal. It's more like I believe in a capitalist underpinning of the economy, but, you know, I support like actions and from the government and from morally that helps poor people out and gives a certain, like, do stuff that collectively we can't all do, like roads and infrastructure and science, like research and development, and help businesses out. Diplomatic, this sounds right. Not complete isolationist, and I think we could trade and talk with others from around the world. I'm fine with cultural exchanges, but I want to fundamentally protect the interests of the nation beyond subserving it to a globalized world. Statist, I think that's a bit tough on me, but what does it mean by statist? It's kind of... Usually I kind of laugh at when people say statist because it seems like, you know, that's just a libertarian buzzword. But I would say a bit more on liberty, but, you know, I'm not like against like liberty in and of itself, but you know, I would kind of be, I would think like 60-40 maybe. A little bit too much authority for my taste, but yeah. Societal, traditional, I think this is good. I think this progress thing is like, do you like science? Do you think global warming is good? Like, should we fight for, like, global warming? I think that's where, like, this thing comes from. But generally speaking, I am traditional. I would say traditional. I like this. Right-wing populist. Closest match. So the thing with A values, I don't really like it with its, like, matching things. I just kind of use it as a way to explain my points of view. Yeah. So... That's kind of my view of it. It's less about, like, figuring out, like, I kind of like this where it breaks down, but I'm not here to, like, figure out who I am. Like, oh, I'm right-wing populist. But anyway, yeah, alrighty. So that's my results. I hope you guys enjoyed. Be sure to like and subscribe. And if you really like it, check out my Patreon. I'm gonna try to get a PayPal too, because I'm probably not. I don't really like Patreon. If you guys want like what I am and want to chip in like $1, like, hey, I really like your video. Here's $1, and just send me $1, and you have no like obligations or whatever. I think I prefer that. If you want, I'm trying to get that accomplished. But anyway, yeah, this is who I am. I like it. I hope you guys enjoyed. This was my 1 year, and I'm probably gonna do this next in a year again to see where I fall, unless I've not changed at all. But I think last time I was a centrist. Now I'm a right-wing populist. But even back then, it was like. I think it was mostly changes in these two types of things. I think before I was more moderate on each of these. Alrighty. So, yeah. Aim high, wander on, from America with Russian love.